Hey beautiful souls. Are you ready for a journey from duty to devotion? From invisible servant to irreplaceable soulmate? Tonight we're diving deep into a world where compassion changes kingdoms, where the most feared become the most beloved, and where sometimes one act of kindness can rewrite your entire destiny. I need you to buckle up because we're about to meet Mira, a woman whose single choice in a blizzard is about to transform her from nobody into everything. But here's what I want you to remember as we begin. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is show mercy when everyone else shows fear. Are you with me? Then let's step into the mountain paths below Blackwater Fortress, on the night that changed everything. Chapter 1. Some say fear is what keeps us alive, but Mira had learned that compassion could be far more dangerous, which made it darkly ironic that her kindness was about to bind her to the most feared wolf in the realm and change her fate forever. They whisper that mercy shown to monsters can reshape kingdoms. As it happened, Mira's mercy would transform the monster himself, softening his brutal reputation and revealing the man beneath the legend. It began with blood in the snow, on a night when Mira struggled down the mountain path toward Blackwater Fortress. The crate of medical supplies dug into her shoulders, glass vials clinking with each step. Master Physician Corwin had insisted someone fetch the rare herbs from the Valley Healer before nightfall, certain the general would return from the northern campaign any day and demand his personal stores be fully prepared. For the victory feast, Corwin had declared, his weathered face bright with certainty. General Kade will want everything perfect when he arrives. Mira had her doubts. The war had ended barely 8 weeks ago. Even if General Kade had departed the battlefield immediately, the trek from the frost wastes took months. More likely, he remained in the conquered territories, ensuring the defeated clans wouldn't rise again. The temperature dropped sharply, making her breath fog. The blizzard the valley folk had predicted was approaching faster than anyone expected. If she didn't reach the fortress soon, she'd be trapped in the mountains when it hit. Then she heard it. A sound that made her blood run cold. Low rasping wrong. Mira froze, listening. There it was again. A wet, labored breathing that didn't belong to any natural creature. Setting the crate down carefully, Mira pushed through the snow-laden pines toward the sound. 30 paces off the path she found him. A massive black wolf lay collapsed in a ravine, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. Even half buried in snowdrift, she could see his enormous size. Easily 3 times larger than any normal wolf. A shifter. Had to be. Most of the realm's shifters had marched north with General Kade, using their animal forms to devastate the enemy forces. The war had been brutal, legendary. This soldier must have survived, only to fall within sight of home. Gods above, she whispered, sliding down into the ravine. Can you hear me? The wolf's eyes cracked open. Amber, glazed with agony. His breathing came shallow and erratic. Blood matted the black fur along his flank, but it was the wound on his neck that made her stomach drop. The flesh had turned gray, spreading like rot through healthy tissue. Frostbane venom. The enemy's most vicious weapon, a poison that prevented shifter regeneration and slowly froze them from the inside out. How long had he been lying here? Mira looked up at the darkening sky. The wind screamed through the trees now, sending ice crystals slicing through the air. In less than an hour, the full blizzard would hit. Anyone caught outside would die, even a shifter. She looked back at the wolf, at those dimming amber eyes. He had spent 7 years in the frozen north, fighting so people like her could sleep safely in their beds, sacrificing everything while she'd lived her small, comfortable life as a physician's assistant. And she was supposed to leave him here to freeze. Absolutely not. Forgive me, Mira muttered, but this is going to hurt. She left the medical supplies where they lay and bent over the wolf. He was massive, easily her own weight or more. But 7 years of hauling supply crates, grinding medicines, and helping move unconscious patients had built strength most people wouldn't expect from someone so slight. Bracing herself, she worked her arms beneath his body and lifted with her legs. The wolf made a sound of pure agony. I know I'm sorry, she gasped. But we have to move. Now. She got him across her shoulders in a fireman's carry, his weight settling on her like an avalanche. Her knees threatened to buckle. The fortress loomed on the cliff above, impossibly distant. One step. Then another. The wind tore at her cloak, sent snow stinging into her face. The wolf was dead weight against her back, his warm blood soaking through her wool dress. Her legs burned, her shoulders screamed. Every breath felt like swallowing knives. I can't do this, she thought as she stumbled, nearly going down. It's too far. I'm not strong enough. But this wolf had traveled farther. Had crossed the entire frozen north, wounded and poisoned, trying to reach home. had spent 7 years facing horrors she'd only heard about in whispered stories. Also, the war wouldn't reach the south, so people like her would be safe. She owed him this. They all did. Mira gritted her teeth and kept climbing. Mira crashed through the servants' entrance, leaving a trail of melting snow and mud across the clean stone floors. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her vision swimming. Blood, not hers, stained her dress from collar to hem. Mira. Master Physician Corwin's voice could have frozen fire. Where have you been? 3 hours late, and you return looking like you've been dragged through a battlefield. Every person in the supply room turned to stare. Apprentices paused mid-task. Even old Brennan, who usually noticed nothing, looked up from his mortar and pestle. Corwin was tall and angular, his gray hair pulled back in the style of senior medical staff. His expression could strip paint from walls. Master Corwin, I apologize, Mira panted, her legs shaking. I found a wounded shifter on the mountain path. Frostbane poisoning. I brought him to the medical wing, the healers are with him now. I'm sorry, Corwin interrupted, his thin lips curving with displeasure. How is that more important than the explicit instructions I gave you? He would have died, Mira's voice cracked. The healers confirmed it. Another hour and the poison would have reached his heart. Surely that's a decision for trained medical staff, not an assistant who abandoned her duties, Corwin said coldly. You had a job. You do that job. Nothing else. The room fell utterly silent. The unfairness of it burned in Mira's chest. Corwin didn't care. The fortress guards hadn't helped either when she'd struggled through the gate. No one cared about the soldiers who'd bled for them, not unless it was convenient. These shifters fought for us, Mira said quietly. They deserve better than being left to die within sight of home. You're dismissed, Corwin announced flatly. Effective immediately. What? The word came out as barely a whisper. You heard me. Corwin gestured sharply toward the door. Pack your belongings. I want you gone before morning. Mira looked desperately toward Elena and Tam near the supply shelves. They looked stricken but didn't dare speak. No one would risk Corwin's wrath. But the storm, she protested weakly. It's getting worse. Can't I wait until? You should have considered that before playing hero, Corwin said, his expression ice. Now get out of my sight. Mira's throat burned. 7 years she'd worked here. 7 years of learning, serving, trying to become someone who mattered. And this was how it ended. She made it to her tiny room before the tears came. Everything she owned fit into a single canvas bag. A spare dress, her mother's silver comb, a few copper coins. 7 years, and this was all she had to show for it. A soft knock. Elena slipped through the door, her round face creased with worry. That was cruel, Elena whispered. Even for Corwin. He was within his rights. I was late. Mira shoved her dress into the bag, not meeting her friend's eyes. You saved a soldier's life. One of General Kade's own men. Corwin doesn't care about that. Mira's hands shook as she worked. The guards didn't either. They stood there and watched me struggle under that wolf's weight. No one helped. Elena's expression flickered with sympathy mixed with something harder, more pragmatic. I know it's not right, Mira, but you have to think of yourself first. Times are difficult. Where will you go? How will you survive? So I should have left him to freeze? The shifter might not even survive, Elena said gently but firmly. The healers weren't optimistic. And what good does your suffering do if he dies anyway? Helping people is what gives life meaning, Mira said, tying her bag closed with shaking hands. If we only protect ourselves, what's the point of any of it? Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she sighed and pressed a bundle into Mira's hands. Bread and dried meat wrapped in cloth. Listen, you can't go out in this storm. Hide in Healer Osric's cottage until it passes. He won't turn you away, he's too soft-hearted. She squeezed Mira's hand. Just pray Corwin doesn't send guards looking, or you'll be in the dungeons for trespassing. Mira hugged her fiercely. Thank you. Stay alive, Elena whispered. And avoid Petra. That one reports everything to Corwin. 10 minutes later, Mira slipped out a side door into the howling storm. The wind had become vicious, turning snow into horizontal needles. She pulled her cloak tight and hurried toward the warm glow of Osric's cottage at the edge of the medical complex. The healer opened the door before she could knock, his kind, weathered face creasing with concern. I wondered if you'd end up here, child. Come in before you freeze. The cottage's warmth wrapped around her like an embrace. Mira sagged with relief, then immediately felt guilty for imposing. I'm sorry to intrude, Healer Osric. Master Corwin dismissed me, and I have nowhere else to shelter until the storm passes. Dismissed you for saving a life? Osric shook his head sadly. That man has forgotten what it means to be a healer. You're welcome here as long as you need. How is he? Mira asked, looking toward the examination table where the black wolf lay, still unconscious. The shifter I brought in? Stable, Osric said, moving toward his herb cabinet with practiced ease. The frostbane is working out slowly, but he'll survive. You got him here just in time. Relief flooded through her so powerfully it made her dizzy. He would live. It had been worth it. Actually, Osric continued, I could use your help. These old hands aren't as steady as they used to be, and that neck wound needs proper cleaning before I can stitch it closed. Of course, Mira said immediately, setting her bag down and moving to the wash basin. Osric guided her through preparing a cleaning solution. Snowleaf for cooling, boneset for tissue repair, silverroot to draw out the poison's remnants. The familiar work settled her frayed nerves. At least here she could still be useful. The wolf's breathing was deeper now, more regular. Mira knelt beside the table and carefully parted the blood-matted fur around his neck wound. The grayness had receded significantly. Osric was right, he'd survive. I'm going to clean this now, she murmured to the unconscious wolf, the way Osric had taught her years ago. It might sting. I'm sorry. She worked slowly, methodically, cleaning away dried blood and debris. The wound was deep but no longer spreading. As she reached for fresh bandages, the wolf's body suddenly went rigid. Mira froze, cloth in hand. Easy, she whispered. You're safe now. You're healing. I'm going to the cellar for more supplies, Osric said behind her. Won't be but a moment. The back door clicked shut. Mira was alone with the wolf. She dipped her cloth in the water basin, wringing it out. Her hands were steadier now, the familiar rhythm of healing work calming her racing heart. At least here she could help. At least the wolf would. The wolf's body went completely rigid beneath her touch. Mira's breath caught. Easy, she whispered. You're safe. No one's going to hurt you. Light bloomed beneath his black fur. Not firelight. Not lantern glow. Something else entirely, silver and cold, like moonlight crystallized into liquid form. It rippled across his body in waves, and the fur began to recede. Mira stumbled backward, her hips striking the table edge. Her heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her throat. What was happening? The light intensified, forcing her to squint. The wolf's form seemed to blur, to shift and reform like smoke given shape. Bones lengthened, limbs restructured. The sound wasn't violent, no cracking or tearing, just a soft whisper like wind through aspens. Then the light faded. And where the wolf had been, a man lay unconscious on the table. A naked man. Mira's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Her first instinct was to look away, to preserve both his modesty and her own like any proper woman should. But she couldn't. Couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. She'd heard stories of shifters her whole life, everyone had. But she'd never witnessed the transformation, never imagined it would be like this, like watching something sacred and terrible and beautiful all at once. Her pulse thundered in her ears. He was enormous. That was her first coherent thought. Tall and powerfully built in a way that made the examination table seem too small to contain him. His skin was tan bronze, marked with scars. So many scars. They crisscrossed his chest, his arms, his abdomen like a history written in violence. Each one told a story of survival, of battles fought and barely won. A warrior. A killer. Someone who'd seen horrors she couldn't begin to imagine. Her gaze traveled upward almost against her will. His face was all brutal angles, sharp jaw, high cheekbones, a blade of a nose that looked like it had been broken at least once. Black hair fell across his forehead, damp with fever sweat. A scar cut through his right eyebrow, stark white against bronze skin. Even unconscious, even wounded and poisoned, he was, beautiful wasn't the right word. Beautiful was too soft, too gentle. He was something fiercer than that. Something that made her stomach drop and her breath catch and her skin feel too tight. Dangerous. That was the word. He looked dangerous. She should cover him. Should grab the blanket and stop staring like some foolish girl who'd never seen a man before. Because she hadn't. Not like this. Not this close. Not. Heat flooded her face as she realized where her eyes had drifted. She jerked her gaze back to his face, her cheeks burning hot enough to hurt. Her hands trembled as she finally moved, reaching for the blanket on the nearby chair. But even as she draped it over his lower body, her eyes kept returning to him. To the broad span of his shoulders, the sculpted planes of his chest rising and falling with each breath, the way his throat worked when he swallowed unconsciously. The curve of his lips slightly parted. Something twisted low in her belly. Unfamiliar and frightening and thrilling all at once. She'd carried him through a blizzard. Saved his life. And now he was here, transformed into this. This man who made her heart race and her thoughts scatter like startled birds. Who was he? The question whispered through her mind as she stood there, unable to look away from the mysterious soldier who'd appeared in her life like something out of legend. Chapter 2. The storm raged for 3 days. Mira barely left his side. There was nowhere else to go, truly. But even if there had been, she wasn't certain she could have torn herself away. Something about him drew her, this enigmatic soldier who'd entered her world like a figure from an old tale. Osric's hands shook too much for the delicate work of wound care, so Mira tended him. She learned the topography of his body, every scar, every ridge of muscle, every place where old injuries had healed imperfectly. The jagged slash across his ribs. The puckered mark on his shoulder blade that looked like claw marks. A burn on his forearm, old and silvered with age. Fever burned through him in cycles. She kept cool compresses on his forehead, his chest, anywhere the heat concentrated most. Her hands moved over his skin countless times, checking for fever, cleaning wounds, applying salves. Professional touches. Medicinal. She tried not to notice the rise and fall of his chest. Tried not to stare at the way his muscles shifted beneath bronze skin when he moved restlessly in sleep. Tried. Failed. It helps to talk to them, Osric had said on the first night. Gives them something to anchor to hold on to through the fever dreams. So Mira talked. She told him about her childhood in the mountain villages, about losing her parents to fever when she was 9, about coming to Blackwater Fortress desperate and half-starved. About 7 years of invisible service, of learning healing arts while being treated as little more than a servant. The realm waited so long for you soldiers to return, she said softly on the second night, wringing out a cloth over the basin. All of you. 7 years is a lifetime. She smoothed the cool cloth across his forehead, her fingers brushing back the black hair that fell over his eyes. His hair was softer than she'd expected, thick and slightly wavy. He stirred beneath her touch, a small furrow appearing between his brows. His breathing quickened, becoming labored. Shoo, Mira murmured, her hand moving to his shoulder, gentle but firm. You're safe here. You're healing. The tension in his body eased slightly at her voice. She felt it beneath her palm, the way his muscles unclenched, his breathing beginning to slow. We heard stories about the battles in the north, she continued, keeping her tone soft and steady. About how the shifters broke the enemy lines. About how brave you all were, how you turned certain defeat into victory. Her hand remained on his shoulder, a grounding touch. You're a hero. You protected people who couldn't protect themselves. You gave 7 years of your life so we could sleep safely. His chest rose and fell, deep and labored at first. But as she spoke, his breathing began to even out, to steady. Thank you, she whispered, smoothing the cloth across his forehead again. Thank you for everything you sacrificed. For the years you gave. For coming home. Something shifted in his face. The harsh lines softened, his lips parting slightly, almost like a smile, though his eyes never opened. He relaxed under her hands, sinking deeper into true sleep. Mira's throat tightened. Even delirious with fever, he'd responded to her gratitude. Had heard her voice and found peace in it. She let her hand linger on his shoulder a moment longer before returning to her work. The second night was worse. The fever spiked again and he became restless, thrashing weakly. His face twisted with pain or memories, she couldn't tell which. No, he mumbled, his head turning side to side on the pillow. Can't, have to. You're safe, Mira said, pressing a cool cloth to his chest. His skin was burning hot. The war is over. You're home. But he didn't hear her. His hand shot out, grasping at nothing, and a sound escaped him, something between a gasp and a groan, raw and agonized. Without thinking, Mira caught his hand in hers. His fingers closed around hers immediately, too tight, almost painful. His grip was desperate, like she was the only solid thing in a world of nightmare. I'm here, she said softly, her other hand moving to his face, cupping his jaw. His stubble was rough against her palm. You're not alone. I'm right here with you. His breathing was ragged, his chest heaving. She kept talking, her voice low and soothing. Told him about the snow outside, about how peaceful the cottage was, about how the poison was leaving his body and soon he'd be strong again. Slowly, so slowly, his breathing calmed. His grip on her hand loosened, though he didn't let go entirely. That's it, she whispered. Just rest. I'm not going anywhere. His thumb moved against her palm just once, barely conscious, but it was there. A response. An acknowledgement. Mira stayed like that for hours, her hand in his, her other hand stroking his hair back from his fevered forehead. She murmured reassurances whenever he grew restless, anchoring him to reality, to safety. By the time dawn broke, her back ached and her arm was numb from the awkward angle. But he was sleeping peacefully, his hand still loosely holding hers. She didn't pull away. On the third day he surfaced briefly. Mira was changing his bandages, her movements practiced and gentle, when his eyes fluttered open. Unfocused, glazed with lingering fever, but open. Where? His voice was barely a rasp, rough from disuse. Healer's cottage at Blackwater Fortress, Mira said quickly, keeping her movements slow and non-threatening. You're safe. You were poisoned with frostbane. Do you remember? His brow furrowed, like he was trying to pull thoughts through thick fog. Then his amber eyes found hers, struggling to focus. You. He swallowed hard, the movement visible in his throat. You saved me. Don't try to talk, she said gently. You need to conserve your strength. His eyes were already drifting closed again, exhaustion pulling him under. But his hand moved, trembling and weak, reaching for her. Mira caught it without thinking, pressing it between both of hers. I'm here, she said. You're going to be all right. His lips moved, forming words she couldn't hear. His eyes were already closing. But just before he slipped back under, his fingers squeezed hers, so faint she almost missed it. An acknowledgement. Thank you. Or maybe just recognition that she was real, that this wasn't another fever dream. She held his hand until his breathing evened out into true sleep. By the fourth morning, everything changed. Mira woke slumped in her chair beside him, her neck stiff from the awkward angle. Pale sunlight streamed through the cottage windows, the first real sunlight in days. The storm had finally broken. She sat up quickly, checking him by instinct. Her hand went to his forehead. Cool. His skin was cool to the touch. Relief flooded through her so strongly it made her dizzy. She pressed her hand to his chest. His heartbeat was strong and steady, his breathing deep and even. The fever was gone. The poison had finally worked its way out of his system. He would live. Mira sagged back in her chair, suddenly exhausted. 3 days of constant vigilance, of watching him fight for every breath, and it was over. He was going to be all right. She let herself look at him properly now, not checking for fever or examining injuries, just looking. At the strong lines of his face, peaceful now in true sleep. At the rise and fall of his chest. At his hands relaxed against the blanket. Beautiful. Mysterious. And soon he would wake. Would be strong enough to leave, to return to whatever life waited for him. The thought settled in her chest like a stone. Outside, the world sparkled with fresh snow and brilliant sunlight. The storm had passed. But Mira stayed where she was, watching over the stranger who'd somehow become precious to her in just 3 days. This soldier whose name she still didn't know. Chapter 3. Mira woke to the sensation of being watched. She dozed off again, her head resting on her folded arms beside his bed. Her back protested as she lifted her head, muscles cramping from the uncomfortable position. But none of that mattered when she found his amber eyes clear and alert, fixed on her face. You're awake, she breathed, sitting up straight. I am, he said, his voice still rough but stronger than before. Who are you? Mira, she replied quickly. I'm the one who found you 4 days ago on the mountain path below the fortress. You were wounded, poisoned. I brought you to the healer. He studied her for a long moment, something like wonder crossing his features. You carried me here? Of course I did, Mira said as if it were obvious. You're a soldier. You spent 7 years fighting in the frozen north to protect this realm. You and all the other shifters who followed General Kade into battle. The least we can do is help when you need it. He stared at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Surprise, certainly. But something deeper too, something that made her pulse quicken. Thank you, he said quietly, his voice carrying weight. You didn't have to do that. She was suddenly acutely aware that he was still shirtless, that the blanket had slipped down to his waist, that she could see every ridge of muscle, every scar, the steady rise and fall of his chest. You must be hungry, she managed, her voice coming out higher than normal. I can make you some broth. Or perhaps some bread if you think you can manage solid food. Mira, he interrupted, and her name on his lips made her look back at him. Do I make you nervous? He asked, looking entirely too pleased with himself. Of course not, she said quickly, feeling her face heat. I've been tending your wounds for days. I'm perfectly comfortable around you. His lips curved into a smile that was absolutely devastating. You're blushing. I am not blushing, she protested even though her cheeks were burning and they both knew it. Has anyone ever told you, he said slowly, his voice dropping lower, that you're rather endearing when you're flustered? The door burst open, making Mira jump. Petra swept inside, her pretty face arranged in false concern. Healer Osric, Master Corwin needs. She stopped dead, her eyes landing on Mira. You're still here? Mira shot to her feet, her heart sinking. Of all people, why did it have to be Petra? The woman loved nothing more than reporting perceived infractions to Corwin, even when there was nothing to report. Petra, I can explain, Mira began. Master Corwin dismissed you, Petra said, crossing her arms. Or did you forget? You were supposed to fetch medical supplies but returned empty-handed with a wounded shifter instead. He would have died if I hadn't brought him here, Mira said, gesturing to the man on the bed. Oh, I'm sure, Petra replied, her smile sharp. But trespassing on fortress grounds after being dismissed? That's serious, Mira. She turned toward the door. I should fetch the guards. Let them sort this out properly. Wait, Petra, please. Mira started forward, but she was already gone, her footsteps echoing as she hurried away. Silence fell over the cottage. What just happened? The soldier asked, his voice hard now, all amusement gone. You were dismissed from your position, Mira said, turning back to him. It's nothing really. The head physician, Master Corwin, he disapproves of everyone. I just happen to be someone he disapproves of more than most. It's just how things are. She tried to shrug it off, tried to make it sound inconsequential. You lost your job, he repeated slowly, sitting up further despite her automatic movement to stop him. Because you helped me. It was worth it, Mira said simply, meeting his eyes. You're alive. That matters more than my employment. He stared at her like she'd grown a second head, like he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. You lost everything for a stranger, he said. You're not a stranger. You're a soldier who fought for us. Who gave 7 years protecting people you'd never met. She shook her head. That deserves more than being left to die in the snow. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, admiration. Something deeper she couldn't name. His hand shot out, catching hers before she could step away. At least let me properly thank you, he said, his voice low and earnest. They were close now. Close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his amber eyes. Close enough to count the individual scars on his chest. Before she could think, before she could talk herself out of it, Mira leaned forward and kissed him. She felt him go still with surprise, felt the sharp intake of his breath. Her free hand had somehow found his bare shoulder, and the heat of his skin beneath her palm made her dizzy. This was her first real kiss. Her first deliberate touch of a man like this, intimate, wanted, chosen. It lasted only a heartbeat. Maybe two. But in that brief moment the entire world fell away. Nothing existed except the warmth of his lips, the shock in his eyes, the thundering of her own heart. When she pulled back, her face was burning. There, she said breathlessly. Now you've been properly thanked. A slow smile spread across the soldier's face, transforming his features. I have to go now, she said, smiling back despite everything. But hopefully you're well enough to come find me soon. And with that, she was moving toward the door, a wild mix of panic and exhilaration rushing through her veins. She fled into the morning sunlight, her lips still tingling from the kiss. Her first kiss, the kiss she'd given him. She'd made it perhaps 20 paces when a sharp voice stopped her cold. Still here, I see, Master Corwin said. Mira froze. Corwin stood near the main path, Petra beside him wearing a satisfied smirk. 2 fortress guards flanked them, their expressions neutral but their hands resting on their sword hilts. Master Corwin, please, I can explain, Mira started. Trespassing on fortress grounds after dismissal is a serious offense, Corwin announced, his voice like ice. Guards, escort her off the premises immediately. She's no longer welcome here. One of the guards moved forward, his hand closing around Mira's arm. Not rough but firm. I just needed shelter from the storm, Mira protested. I wasn't trying to cause trouble. You were told to leave. You defied a direct order, Corwin stated flatly. Perhaps a night in the cells will teach you about following instructions. Stop, a voice commanded. Everyone turned. The soldier stood in the cottage doorway. He'd found clothes somewhere, ill-fitting brown trousers and a loose shirt that hung open at the throat. His black hair was disheveled and he was barefoot. But he stood straight and tall, radiating authority. Release her immediately, he ordered, his voice quiet but carrying absolute command. The guard holding Mira loosened his grip slightly. And who are you to give orders? Corwin demanded, though something flickered in his expression. Uncertainty. The soldier stepped forward into the full sunlight. His amber eyes swept over the assembled group with the kind of assessing gaze that came from years of command, years of making life-and-death decisions. One of the guards, an older man with silver threaded through his beard, went completely still. His face drained of color. Merciful gods, he breathed and dropped immediately to his knees. General Kade. The words echoed in the sudden silence. Master Corwin froze mid-breath. The other guard dropped to his knees so fast Mira heard the impact. General, he gasped. The soldier she'd rescued. The man she'd tended for 3 days. The wounded shifter she'd talked to, confided in, thanked for his service. The man she'd kissed was General Kade, the legendary warrior who'd conquered the North, the most feared commander in the realm. Oh gods! She'd kissed the general. Her legs felt like water. Her face burned so hot she thought she might actually faint. Rise all of you, Kade commanded, though his eyes never left Mira's face. The guards scrambled up. Corwin remained in his half-bow, uncertain. What's happening here? Kade's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. A misunderstanding, General Kade, Corwin started quickly. A simple. This woman was dismissed for helping me, Kade cut him off. For saving my life when I was wounded and dying in the snow. Is that correct? Silence. Answer me, he ordered. She abandoned her duties, General, Corwin said quickly, his voice higher than normal. Master physician protocol requires. She saved the general's life, Kade said, his voice soft. Dangerous. While my own guards apparently couldn't be bothered to help carry their wounded commander to safety. Would you like to explain that? The older guard looked like he wanted to sink through the earth. I thought not, Kade continued. He turned his full attention back to Mira. You, he said. As of this moment, you're assigned to my personal medical staff. Report to my quarters this afternoon. I'll inform my steward to prepare accommodations for you. Mira couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't process what was happening. More people were arriving now, servants, officials, soldiers drawn by the commotion and the impossible sight of their general standing in the healer's doorway. Word was spreading like wildfire through the fortress. General Kade had returned. Chapter 4. 3 weeks had passed since General Kade's return. The war was over. The realm was secure. But no one's life had changed quite as dramatically as Mira's. She was now part of the general's personal medical staff. She saw him constantly and it was exquisite torture. Because every time she looked at him, seated at his war table reviewing reports, standing by the windows conferring with his commanders, walking through the training yards inspecting his soldiers, she remembered the feel of his bare skin under her hands, the heat of him, the scars she'd traced with her fingers as she'd cleaned his wounds, the softness of his lips when she'd kissed him. Now those same shoulders were hidden beneath leather armor and military dress. That same chest was covered in the dark gray uniform of his rank. That same mouth issued commands to officers and delivered judgments to nobles. He was General Kade, powerful, untouchable, legendary. Surrounded always by people who belonged in his world of strategy and warfare and command. And she was a former physician's assistant who'd gotten impossibly lucky and impossibly stupid in equal measure. Sometimes she felt his eyes on her. She'd be organizing medical supplies or preparing treatment trays, and awareness would prickle down her spine. But she could never hold his gaze. It felt too intimate, too dangerous. It had been so simple in the healer's cottage. Just a wounded soldier and the woman who'd saved him. Now there were ranks and protocols and an entire fortress between them. You seem nervous, Mira, he'd said once when she'd nearly dropped a tray of instruments. His amber eyes had been amused, like her discomfort was entertaining. Do I still make you nervous? She'd stammered something incoherent and fled. The fortress had transformed since his return. The halls rang with laughter instead of fearful whispers. Soldiers trained with renewed purpose. Even the servants moved with more confidence, no longer terrified of arbitrary dismissals and cruel punishments. But for Mira, every day was a reminder of a moment that should never have happened, a kiss that had crossed every line of propriety. Did you hear? Elena whispered one evening as they folded linens in the supply room. Mira looked up from her work. Hear what? About the general, Tam added, her eyes bright with gossip. He's going to announce his betrothal. The needle Mira had been using to repair a torn sheet slipped, pricking her finger. She watched a bead of blood well up, bright red against her pale skin. To Lady Vera of the Eastern Holdings, Elena continued, oblivious to Mira's reaction. Everyone's talking about it. It's a political match, of course, Her family controls the mountain passes. What did you expect? Petra's voice cut in from the doorway. She'd been reinstated after Corwin's dismissal. Apparently her role in the poisoning plot had been deemed unwitting assistance rather than active conspiracy. A general needs a proper wife. Someone of standing. Of course he did. Mira excused herself quietly and fled to the small room she now occupied in the medical wing. It was larger than her previous quarters, with an actual window overlooking the training yards. A significant improvement. But she barely noticed as she sank onto the bed, her chest tight. She'd fallen in love with him. With the man she'd seen at his most vulnerable, who'd held her hand through fever dreams, who'd defended her against Corwin's cruelty. Who'd looked at her like she mattered. And he was getting betrothed to someone else. A knock at her door made her look up. One of the general's aides stood in the corridor, his expression neutral. Mira of the medical staff, he said formally. General Kade requests your presence in his private chambers immediately. Her heart stuttered. Now. Immediately, the aide confirmed. The walk to Kade's quarters felt like a march to execution. Mira's hands trembled as she climbed the stairs to the upper levels where senior officers resided. She'd never been to this part of the fortress before. The aide led her to a heavy oak door, knocked once, then departed without a word. Enter, Kade's voice called from within. Mira pushed the door open with shaking hands. The room was large but Spartan, a commander's quarters, not a lord's luxury. Maps covered one wall. A weapons rack held various blades. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows. Kade stood by the fireplace, the flames haloing his frame. His military coat was gone, leaving only a loose white shirt that fell open at the throat. He looked nothing like the distant general she served during the day. He looked like the wounded soldier she tended, beautiful and dangerously human. You sent for me, General? She managed, her voice barely above a whisper. I did. He turned to face her, and the intensity in his amber eyes made her breath catch. Come here, Mira. Her feet felt rooted to the floor, but somehow she moved forward. One step. Two. Closer, he said softly. She took another step, her heart hammering. The wound on my shoulder, he said, tilting slightly to give her access. It's been bothering me. I think it may have become infected. Will you look? Her mouth went dry. General Kade, perhaps the senior healer should. I'm asking you, he said, his voice dropping lower. There was no refusing that tone. Her hands shook as she reached for the edge of his shirt, carefully pushing it aside to expose his shoulder. The brush of fabric revealed smooth bronze skin and hard muscle. The heat rolling off him in waves made her flush instantly. The wound was fine, perfectly healed, just a faint pink line where the frostbane had burned. But her fingers still traced it delicately, reverently, trying to ignore the way her breath stuttered in her throat. It looks fine, she whispered. No infection. Good, Kade murmured. He stood very still, as if inviting her to touch him longer, to linger. Are you happy here, Mira? He asked suddenly. In my service? The question startled her. Of course, General, she said automatically. You've been more than generous. You don't seem it, his voice dropped even lower. You avoid my gaze. You flee every room I enter. Her heart thrashed against her ribs. She could feel the slow rise and fall of his breathing beneath her fingertips. Could see the strong lines of his throat, how his shirt dipped low enough to reveal the sculpted shape of his chest. I'm only trying to be proper, she managed. Proper, he repeated with quiet amusement. He turned slowly, and the movement brought his face inches from hers. Her lips parted but no sound came. From where I stand, he murmured, it feels like you're pretending we're strangers. Her breath hitched. General, It's as though we didn't spend days alone together, he interrupted softly. As though I don't think about it constantly. His hand rose, deliberate and slow, engulfing hers where it still rested against his shoulder. The simple contact made her knees weak. Every time I see you in the corridors, he said, his voice rough, every time you bow and hurry away, I think about you sitting beside me in that cottage, talking to me like I was just a man. You are the general, she said weakly. And yet all I see is you, he said. Even when you're not there. Her chest constricted painfully. This couldn't be real. He couldn't be saying these things. You're mocking me, she said, trying to pull her hand back. He didn't let go. Suddenly his body was against hers, his amber eyes locked onto her lips. I keep thinking about that kiss, he said, his voice roughened. The one you gave me before you ran. Heat swept through her, low and heavy. General Kade, I apologize if I was too forward, she attempted. You left, he said quietly, before I could return it. Her breath stopped. I don't understand. Don't you? His free hand rose to her jaw, cupping it gently. Let me make it clearer. Then his mouth crashed into hers with heated purpose, his hand sliding to the back of her neck, pulling her closer. Her mind went white with sensation. This kiss wasn't like the soft, frightened kiss she'd given him in the cottage. This was hunger. This was demand. This was a man taking what he wanted and knowing she wanted it too. When she gasped against his mouth, his tongue swept past her lips and she clutched at his shirt, desperate to stay upright, to keep breathing, to keep feeling him everywhere. He lifted her slightly, backing her against the wall. Cold stone pressed against her spine, but his heat smothered it instantly. His hands gripped her waist, holding her in place. Mira, he breathed against her lips, his voice ragged. I want. Her breath broke. He wanted her. The general wanted the nobody who'd saved him, who'd kissed him once and fled in panic. And God's help her, she wanted him back. Had never wanted anything like this, never felt anything this consuming. But that was the problem. For him this was fleeting. A general amusing himself with a servant, gratitude mixed with attraction. Nothing more. For her this was everything. She was already falling. Had already felt her heart breaking at the thought of the moment this would end. And if she let this continue, if she gave herself to him completely, she'd want it forever. She'd want him forever. No, she gasped, pushing against his chest. General? Mira, his voice was rough, confused. Please, she said, tears burning in her eyes. Please, General, I can't do this. His eyes were dark, pupils blown wide, his black hair disheveled where her fingers had tangled in it. Why not? He asked. Because I'm falling in love with you, she thought. Because you're the general, she said instead. Because I know my place. She ducked under his arm and ran. She heard him call her name, heard his footsteps behind her, heavy and fast. But she was faster, knew the servant corridors better. She fled through hidden passages, her lungs burning, her whole body trembling. She turned a corner into a narrow storage corridor and stopped short. Voices coming from an alcove ahead. Low, secretive. Another 30 silver this month, a man's voice said. The usual arrangement. And no one's noticed the discrepancies. The records balance perfectly, another voice replied. Mira recognized it. Garrett, one of the supply masters. I provide the spoiled grain and rancid meat from the old stores. You mark it down as fresh provisions and we split the difference. The general's household never knows. Mira's blood ran cold. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to catch her breath silently. Good, the first voice said. With all these returning soldiers to feed, we can increase the skim. Make it 50 silver next month. And ensure those tainted rations go to the lower barracks first. Officers won't eat the slop anyway. Agreed. No one pays attention to what the common soldiers eat. Mira's hands clenched into fists. They were poisoning the soldiers. The men who just returned from 7 years of war, and these parasites were feeding them spoiled food to make a profit. She needed to tell someone. No, first she needed proof. Who knew how many others were involved? How deep did this corruption run? Mira slipped away silently, her mind racing. The kiss, the general, her confused heart, all of it would have to wait. Men's lives were at stake. Chapter 5. Over the next few days, Mira watched. She kept her head down, performed her duties, and paid attention to things she'd previously ignored. The supply wagons that arrived at odd hours. The way certain storage rooms were always locked, even during the day. How Garrett's records never quite matched the actual provisions in the medical wing stores. She'd noticed it before but assumed it was simple incompetence. Now she knew better. Mira began keeping notes, careful to hide them in the lining of her travel bag. Dates, times, discrepancies. Today, 5 days into her investigation, she found herself in the herb garden behind the medical wing, ostensibly checking the winter stores against Garrett's supply ledger. The numbers didn't match. They never did. You're very focused on those plants, a voice said behind her. Mira jumped, nearly dropping the ledger. General Kade. She dropped into a hasty curtsy. I didn't hear you approach. I noticed, he said, amusement warming his voice. You've been avoiding me again. I've been working, Mira said quickly, then remembered she was speaking to the general and added, Sir. His eyebrows rose, but he looked more amused than offended. Walk with me. It wasn't quite a command, but it wasn't a request either. They walked in silence for a moment, Mira acutely aware of him beside her. The garden was peaceful, snow-dusted and quiet. They were alone, no aides, no soldiers, no witnesses. Mira, he said quietly. I owe you an apology. Her heart sank. General, you don't? I do, he interrupted. For the other night in my chambers. I shouldn't have kissed you like that. It was inappropriate. I took advantage of my position. The words cut deeper than they should have. Of course he regretted it. Of course. You don't need to apologize, General, Mira said, keeping her voice steady. I understand. I know my place. He stopped walking abruptly, turning to face her. No, he said, his voice sharp. I don't think you do. She looked up at him, confused by the intensity in his amber eyes. You saved my life, Mira, he said, and there was something raw in his voice now. Passionate. After I spent 7 years saving everyone else's. That's my duty as general. It's what I'm supposed to do, and I don't fault anyone for needing it. But you. He took a breath. You saved me. Not because I'm a general, but because you are kind. Your compassion isn't common, he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. Most people in this fortress look at me and see a weapon, a tool, a symbol. You looked at me and saw someone who needed help. Mira's throat tightened, warmth blooming in her chest, dangerous and wonderful. That means something to me, he said softly. And I regret kissing you because I'm afraid it might have given you the wrong impression regarding my intentions. Oh. Understanding crashed over her. What she'd done mattered to him. And because of that, because he cared about her feelings, he was trying to spare her from hoping for something he couldn't give. Don't worry, General, Mira said quietly. You're the general. I'm nobody. I know my place. You haven't hurt me or disappointed me. I promise. Something flickered across his face. Frustration, confusion, almost pain. The victory celebration is tonight, he said abruptly, seeming to change direction entirely. I want you to attend as my personal guest. Mira frowned. I'm sorry, what? I'm inviting you to the celebration, he said, a small smile playing at his lips. As my guest. General, that's... Mira shook her head. Medical staff don't attend victory celebrations. Those are for officers and nobles and anyone I invite, he interrupted gently. I want you there. His hand came up as if to touch her face, then seemed to think better of it. Please say yes. He was standing so close, and the afternoon sun caught in his black hair, turning it almost blue. He was looking at her like her answer actually mattered to him, like it was important. Yes, she heard herself whisper. Good. His smile was brilliant, transforming his usually stern features. I hope you'll see that my intentions are sincere, because I plan to make sure everyone else does. General Kade. A lieutenant appeared at the garden gate, looking apologetic. Sir, the council is waiting. The supply audit meeting? Of course. Kade's expression shifted back to professional command. He glanced at Mira once more, something warm and promising in his eyes, then strode away with his aide, leaving Mira standing alone in the garden, wondering what she'd just agreed to. Did you hear? Elena whispered that evening as they prepared the medical wing for the night. Mira looked up from organizing bandages. Hear what? About tonight's celebration, Tam said, leaning in conspiratorially. The general is going to announce his betrothal. To Lady Vera of the Eastern Holdings. Everyone's talking about it. The bandage in Mira's hands tore. A political match, Elena continued. Well, what did you expect? The general needs a proper wife, Petra's voice cut in from the doorway. She'd been hovering around the medical wing more often lately, though Mira couldn't figure out why. Someone of appropriate standing. Someone who understands the responsibilities of such a position. Mira's throat closed. She excused herself quickly and fled to her small room. A package was waiting on her bed. With shaking hands, Mira unwrapped it to find the most beautiful gown she'd ever seen. Deep blue silk the color of midnight, embroidered with silver thread that caught the light like stars. A matching mask. The celebration was a masked event, she remembered. A note in strong, masculine handwriting. For tonight. I look forward to seeing you. Okay. Mira sank onto the bed, the beautiful gown in her lap, and cried. She'd fallen in love with this man. Who'd held her hand through fever. Who'd defended her against Corwin. Who'd kissed her like she was precious. And he was getting betrothed to someone else tonight. She folded the gown carefully back into its box. She wouldn't go. Couldn't watch him pledge himself to another woman. A knock at the door made her freeze. Open up, a guard's voice commanded. By order of Supply Master Garrett. Mira opened the door to find 2 guards flanking Petra, who wore vindictive satisfaction. Behind them stood Garrett, his weathered face arranged in false regret. I'm afraid there's been a serious accusation, Garrett said gravely. Theft from the general's personal supplies. Medical provisions gone missing. That's impossible, Mira protested. I haven't taken anything. Search her room, Garrett ordered. The guards tore through her meager belongings. One reached under her mattress, where Mira definitely hadn't hidden anything, and pulled out a small cloth bag. Inside, expensive medicinal herbs, still in their official supply containers. I've never seen those before in my life, Mira breathed. Of course you'd say that, Petra said sweetly. Everyone says that when they're caught. The penalty for stealing from the general's household is imprisonment, Garrett announced, eyes gleaming. And possible exile. Guards, take her to the cells. No, please, I didn't do this, Mira cried as the guards seized her arms. But no one listened. Elena and Tam appeared in the doorway, horrified but silent. They couldn't risk Garrett's wrath. The guards dragged Mira through corridors, down stone steps into the cold depths beneath the fortress. Into the darkness. Chapter 6. The cell was cold and dark, and Mira had lost all sense of time. Hours? It felt like days. She sat on the narrow stone bench, arms wrapped around herself, trying not to think about what was happening above. The celebration had started. She could hear it, distant music filtering down through layers of stone. Muffled sounds of revelry. Laughter. Joy. The general was up there, announcing his betrothal to Lady Vera. Moving forward with his life while she rotted in a cell for a crime she didn't commit. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. Mira looked up, expecting guards coming to move her to deeper cells or worse. Instead, Elena and Tam appeared at the bars, their faces pale but determined. We're getting you out, Elena whispered urgently. What? Mira shook her head. No, you can't, if they catch you. You're always taking risks for others, Tam said firmly. Now we're taking one for you. She pulled something from her apron, a set of thin metal picks. My brother works in the forge. Taught me a few things about locks. You'll be thrown in here with me, Mira protested. Or worse. Then we'd better not get caught, Elena said, keeping watch while Tam knelt by the lock. This is madness, Mira breathed. But hope flickered in her chest for the first time in hours. The lock clicked. The cell door swung open. Come on, Elena urged, pulling Mira to her feet. We need to. Voices echoed from around the corner. All three women froze, pressing themselves into the shadows. Two guards walked past, their conversation drifting back clearly. Extra security at the celebration tonight, one said. What? What's the concern? Supply Master Garrett mentioned something about a potential poisoning attempt. That medical assistant they arrested. Apparently she was planning to poison the general during the betrothal announcement. Really? What would she gain from that? Who knows? But Garrett caught her before she could act. Good thing too. Can you imagine if something happened to the general at his own celebration? The voices faded as they turned another corner. Mira's blood ran cold. What are they talking about? Elena whispered. Poisoning the general, Mira said, horror washing over her. Garrett's going to poison him. And frame me for it. You? Tam asked. But you're locked up down here? All the better, Mira said, her mind racing. He's already convinced the guards it was my plan. If the general is poisoned tonight, I'll be the perfect culprit. He can claim I had an accomplice who carried out the plot. But why would he take such a risk just to frame you? Elena asked. Because I discovered what he's been doing, Mira said quickly, the pieces falling into place. He's been stealing from the fortress supplies for months, selling spoiled food to the soldiers' barracks, poisoning the men who just returned from war. I've been gathering evidence. He must have found out I was investigating. To the point of murdering the general? Tam exclaimed, horrified. He's desperate. Cornered, Mira said. If the general discovers the corruption, Garrett will be executed. This way he eliminates the threat and gets rid of the witness who could expose him. We have to warn the general, Elena said. Now. They fled through the servants' passages, taking stairs two at a time. Mira's heart hammered. If Garrett succeeded, Kade would die. And Mira would hang for his murder. They burst into the medical wing. Mira rushed to her room, searching for the gown. Gone. The beautiful midnight blue gown, the silver mask, everything. How am I supposed to get into the celebration? Mira said desperately. Here, Elena thrust a simple servant's dress at her. It's plain but it's clean. And this? Tam pressed a simple cloth mask into Mira's hands. It's not fancy but it'll get you past the door guards. Everyone's required to wear masks tonight. Mira changed quickly, her fingers trembling. The dress was brown homespun, nothing like the shimmering gown the general had sent. The mask was plain, unadorned. Go, Elena urged. Hurry. Mira ran. The great hall was magnificent, all golden light and glittering chandeliers. The cream of the realm's nobility dressed in silks and jewels, their faces hidden behind elaborate masks. Music swelled from the orchestra. Couples danced across the polished floor in a kaleidoscope of color. Mira had never felt more out of place in her life. She slipped through the main doors, keeping to the edges of the crowd. Servants moved between guests with trays of wine and delicacies. In her plain dress and simple mask, no one looked twice at her. She searched desperately for Kade. She had to warn him. She could clear her name later, could explain everything later. Right now, all that mattered was keeping him alive. Please, she thought, please let me reach him in time. There, on the dais at the far end of the hall. Her breath caught. He stood beside his chair of command, magnificent in black leather and silver clasps, a ceremonial blade at his hip. He looked every inch the legendary general he was, powerful, commanding, untouchable. But there was something in his expression. A tightness around his eyes, a tension in his shoulders. He looked unhappy. He was scanning the crowd, she realized. Looking for someone. Looking for her, maybe. For the woman in the midnight blue gown he'd sent. Guilt and longing twisted in her stomach. Then movement at the grand entrance made the entire hall turn. A woman appeared at the top of the stairs, and a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. She was stunning. Radiant. The midnight blue silk gown caught the light from 1,000 candles, silver embroidery glittering like captured stars. She descended the stairs slowly, gracefully, and every eye in the hall followed her. Who is that? Someone whispered nearby. Magnificent, another voice murmured. Even the orchestra seemed to swell, as if the universe itself was celebrating her arrival. Mira's heart stopped. Petra. That was her gown. The gown the general had sent for her. The gown that was supposed to transform her into someone who belonged in this glittering world, even if just for one night. And Petra wore it like she'd been born to it. Like this was her fairy tale moment. Like she was Mira, coming to answer the general's invitation. Horror washed over Mira. Petra wasn't just stealing her gown. She was stealing her identity. Garrett's plan was perfect. Poison the general while Petra was dressed as Mira, and have every witness in the hall swear they saw Mira do it. The crowd parted for Petra, nobles bowing slightly as she passed. She moved through them like royalty, radiant and confident, every inch the noble woman she was pretending to be. On the dais, Kade turned toward the vision in midnight blue descending toward him. His face transformed. The careful control, the military bearing, it all fell away. His expression opened like sunrise, raw and unguarded. Relief flooded his features, followed by something so tender it made Mira's chest ache. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. He looked like a man who'd been holding his breath and could finally breathe again. Like he'd been waiting for this moment all night. All because he thought Petra was her. Had he ever looked at her like that when Mira had been too nervous to meet his eyes? Had this been there all along, this desperate relief? Is that Lady Vera? A noble woman whispered nearby. In the blue gown? Must be, her companion replied. Look how pleased the general is to see her. I've never seen him smile like that. Lady Vera. The betrothal announcement. But the way he was looking at Petra, at the woman he thought was Mira, that wasn't how you looked at a political arrangement. That wasn't duty or strategy. That was... Petra reached the dais, climbing the steps with practiced grace. She curtsied low and Mira saw it then. The goblet in her hands. Dark red wine that caught the light wrong, that seemed almost oily in its consistency. Petra extended the goblet toward the general, her head bowed demurely, the picture of modest elegance. A traditional offering, the guest presenting a toast to the host. Kade reached for it without hesitation, still smiling, still looking at the woman in midnight blue like she was the only person in the room. The goblet. The poison. Mira's paralysis shattered. No, she screamed. She broke through the final row of nobles and threw herself forward. The crowd gasped. Guards moved, but she was faster, driven by pure terror. Mira reached the dais just as Kade's fingers touched the goblet's stem. She knocked it from Petra's hands with her own empty cup she'd grabbed from a passing servant's tray. The poisoned wine spilled across the white marble steps. Where it hit, the stone hissed and blackened. Smoke rose from the corroded marble. The roses in a nearby vase withered instantly, their petals turning brown and crumbling to ash. The metal goblet itself began to corrode, eaten away by whatever venom had been mixed into the wine. The hall fell absolutely silent. Everyone stared at the destroyed marble, at the dead flowers, at the undeniable evidence of poison. Then at Petra, frozen in shock, still wearing Mira's gown. And at Mira, in her plain brown dress and simple mask, breathing hard, her hand still extended from knocking away death. Kade's eyes locked on hers. Recognition flooded his face, followed by a dozen emotions too fast to name. Mira, he breathed. Chapter 7. The hall was frozen in shocked silence. 1,000 eyes stared at the corroded marble, at the dead roses, at the clear evidence of poison meant for their general. But Mira saw only him. Kade's amber eyes locked on hers, and the world narrowed to just the two of them. Recognition, relief, and something fiercer flooded his face. He moved before she could breathe, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. His hands came up to frame her face, tilting it toward his, and the look in his eyes made her heart stutter. "You came," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. "You're here. You're safe." Mira smiled despite everything, despite the chaos, the danger, the 1,000 watching nobles. "I came," she whispered. "I couldn't let." But then his brow furrowed, confusion clouding the joy in his eyes. His thumb stroked her cheekbone as if assuring himself she was real. "But I don't understand," he said. "Who was that woman? Why were you?" A shriek cut through the air. Petra bolted, trying to flee down the dais steps. Guards seized her immediately, their hands clamping on her arms. "Let me go," she struggled. "I didn't do anything. She made me wear this dress, she told me it was." "Explain," Kade commanded, his hand still framing Mira's face, not letting her go. "Quickly." "Earlier today I was framed for theft and imprisoned," Mira said rapidly. "Supply Master Garrett planted evidence in my room because I discovered he's been stealing from the fortress for months, buying spoiled provisions and selling them to the soldiers' barracks while pocketing the difference. My friends broke me out when we overheard guards talking about a poisoning attempt planned for tonight." She gestured to Petra. "She wore the gown you sent me so she could pose as me and poison you. Everyone would think I did it. I'd already been arrested for theft, so it would seem like an escalation. Garrett orchestrated everything to silence me before I could expose the corruption." Kade's jaw tightened, his eyes going cold and dangerous. "Guards, bring Garrett here. Now." The crowd parted as guards dragged the supply master through the hall. His face had gone gray, but he tried to maintain an expression of innocence. "General Kade, this is clearly a misunderstanding," Garrett started, his voice only slightly trembling. "This girl has obviously—" "Search her," Kade ordered, cutting him off. "Thoroughly." One of the guards reached into Petra's bodice. She shrieked in protest, but he pulled out a small glass vial, still half full of dark, viscous liquid. "Nightshade," the guard announced, unstopping it carefully and sniffing. "Concentrated. Mixed with something else. Ironbane maybe. This amount would kill a man in minutes." Gasps rippled through the hall. This wasn't just poison, this was assassination-grade venom. "That's not mine," Petra sobbed. "Garrett gave it to me. He said it was wine, a special vintage to present to the general. He said I'd be rewarded for wearing the dress, for delivering it." "Lies," Garrett spat. "General, this woman is clearly trying to—" "I have evidence," Mira said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Notes, dates, records of discrepancies between Garrett's ledgers and the actual supplies delivered. Proof of his theft going back months." "Convenient that you'd claim this now," Garrett sneered. "Your word against mine. Who do you think?" "She's telling the truth," Elena's voice rang out from the crowd. Other servants stepped forward, emboldened. "A cook, a stable master, a junior quartermaster." "Garrett ordered me to falsify inventory records," the quartermaster said nervously. "Said he'd have me dismissed if I refused." "He threatened my position when I mentioned the quality of the grain," the cook added. "Said soldiers should be grateful for whatever they get." "He's been selling spoiled meat to the barracks for at least 6 months, another voice called. "I saw the wagons." Garrett's face twisted with rage. "You dare? You insignificant." "Enough," Kade's voice cut through the hall like a blade. His hands dropped from Mira's face as he turned to his guards, his expression granite hard. "Arrest them both. Garrett and Petra will stand trial for attempted murder, conspiracy, theft, corruption, and treason against the realm. I want a full investigation, every supply record audited, every transaction traced. Anyone else involved will be found and prosecuted." "No." Garrett struggled as guards seized his arms. You take the word of a common servant over mine? I've served this fortress for 20 years. You've been stealing from my soldiers for 20 years, Kade said coldly. From men who spent 7 years bleeding in the frozen north so parasites like you could live in safety. Remove them from my sight. The guards dragged both prisoners away, their protests echoing through the suddenly silent hall. Kade turned back to Mira, his expression softening instantly. The cold fury melted into something warm and wondering. Mira, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. You saved my life. Again. I couldn't let, she started. You risked everything to warn me, he continued. Even after being falsely imprisoned, even after having everything stripped from you. You came anyway. Of course I did, Mira said simply. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, to her complete shock, he sank to one knee before her. The entire hall gasped. What are you doing? Mira breathed, trying to tug him up. Get up. You're the general, you can't. I can very much kneel before my future wife, he said, his amber eyes locked on hers. The hall erupted in whispers. Your wife. Mira repeated, certain she'd misheard. If you'll accept, he said, reaching for her hand and pressing a kiss to her knuckles that made her shiver. Become my wife, Mira? The hall seemed to tilt. Mira stared at him, unable to process the words. I don't, but the betrothal announcement, she managed. Lady Vera. A rumor, Kade said firmly, rising to his feet but keeping her hands clasped in his. A lie, probably spread by Garrett to muddy the waters, to make tonight's events more confusing. There never was any betrothal arrangement, Mira. There was only ever you. She shook her head, confused. But why then did you invite me tonight? Why send the gown if? Let me be clear, Kade said, and his voice rang through the hall so everyone could hear. Mira, you saved my life when I was dying in the snow. You healed me and cared for me when I was at my most vulnerable. You treated me like a man, not a weapon or a symbol or a tool to be used. His voice grew more intense. You exposed corruption in my fortress at great personal risk. You escaped imprisonment to save me from assassination. You're clever and brave and kind and selfless, everything a general's wife should be. Everything I could ever hope for. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face behind her simple mask. General? Also, he interrupted, his voice dropping lower, more intimate, I'm in love with you. In case that wasn't clear. A sob escaped her, happy, disbelieving, overwhelmed. His hands came up to cup her face again, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. If you need time to think about it, you can have it. I know this is sudden, I know. Mira kissed him. She pushed up on her toes and pressed her lips to his, pouring every ounce of feeling she'd been suppressing into it. All the fear, the longing, the desperate hope she'd been too afraid to acknowledge. His arms wrapped around her waist immediately, pulling her close, kissing her back with a fierce tenderness that made her head spin. The hall erupted in applause and cheers, but Mira barely heard it. Kade smiled against her lips, pulling back just enough to murmur, Is that a yes? Yes, Mira breathed, laughing through her tears. Yes, yes, yes. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and the crowd cheered louder. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kade kept one arm firmly around her waist as he turned to address the assembled nobles. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice ringing with joy, may I present your future Lady General. The applause was deafening. Nobles bowed. Servants cheered from the sides of the hall. Even the orchestra seemed to play more jubilantly. And Mira, the nobody who'd saved a dying wolf in a blizzard, stood beside her general and realized that sometimes the most feared monsters were just men waiting for someone brave enough to see them. 3 months later. The wedding was a modest affair by noble standards. Mira had insisted. Just close friends, trusted officers, and the servants who'd stood by her when it mattered. Elena and Tam stood beside her as she dressed in a gown of silver and white. Not the midnight blue that had nearly been used for murder, but something new, something that belonged only to this moment. I still can't believe this is happening, Elena whispered, adjusting Mira's veil. Neither can I, Mira admitted. Sometimes I wake up and think it must be a dream. It's real, Tam said firmly. And you deserve every bit of it. You saved his life twice, exposed corruption, and never asked for anything in return. If anyone deserves a fairy tale ending, it's you. A knock at the door. Healer Osric poked his head in, his weathered face creasing with a smile. Ready, child? The general is getting impatient. I've never seen a man more eager to get married. Mira took a deep breath. Ready. The ceremony was held in the fortress chapel, A small stone building with stained glass windows that cast colored light across the floor. It was intimate, perfect. Kade stood at the altar in formal military dress, but his expression when he saw her walk down the aisle was anything but formal. It was the same look he'd given her that night at the celebration, raw, unguarded, full of wonder, like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. The ceremony was simple, traditional. But when the officiant pronounced them bound, when Kade kissed her in front of everyone, Mira felt something shift in her chest. She wasn't invisible anymore. Wasn't nobody. She was seen. She was valued. She was loved. That night in their private chambers, Kade pulled her close. "Do you know what I thought?" he murmured against her hair, "when I first woke up in that cottage and saw you?" "What?" Mira asked, her hand resting over his heart. "I thought I was still dreaming. That the fever had finally taken me and this was some kind of afterlife, being cared for by the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen." Mira laughed. "You were barely conscious. How could you possibly?" "I remember everything," he said softly. "Every word you spoke to me. Every time you held my hand through the fever. Every kindness." His hand came up to tilt her face toward his. "You saved me in more ways than one, Mira. You reminded me what I was fighting for. Why protecting people matters." "You would have done the same for anyone," she said. "Maybe," he agreed. "But I wouldn't have fallen in love with just anyone. That was all you." He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise. And Mira realized that her story hadn't been about saving a monster at all. It had been about finding someone who saw her the same way she saw him. Not as a symbol or a tool or an obligation, but as a person worth saving. Worth loving. Worth everything. Epilogue 1 year later. Mira walked through the fortress gardens, now lush with summer growth. So much had changed in a year. The corruption investigation had uncovered a network of theft that went deeper than anyone imagined. Dozens of officials implicated, all facing justice. Garrett and Petra were in prison, serving lengthy sentences. The soldiers' barracks now received proper provisions and morale had never been higher. Mira herself had become something unexpected, a voice for the common people in Kade's administration. She advised on supply distribution, helped establish a healer's training program for anyone who wanted to learn regardless of birth. Used her position to lift up others the way she'd been lifted. "There you are," Kade's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him approaching, still in his training leathers from the morning drills. He looked tired but content. "How was training?" she asked as he wrapped his arms around her. "Good. The new recruits are promising." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "But I missed you." "I was gone 2 hours," she laughed. 2 hours too long," he murmured against her hair. They stood like that for a moment, wrapped in each other, the summer sun warm on their faces. "Mira," he said softly. "Oh, thank you." She pulled back to look at him. "For what?" "For being brave enough to save a monster in the snow," he said, his amber eyes warm. "For seeing past the fear and the legend to the man underneath. For giving me a reason to be more than just a weapon." Mira reached up to cup his face, her thumb brushing over the scar through his eyebrow. "You were never a monster, Kade. You were just a man who needed someone to see him." He smiled, that brilliant, unguarded smile he saved only for her. "And you were just a woman who needed someone to see her worth." "I guess we saved each other then," she said softly. "I guess we did." He kissed her there in the garden, surrounded by life and growth and hope. And Mira thought about that night in the blizzard, carrying a dying wolf up a mountain. About how a single act of compassion had changed everything. They say the smallest kindness can reshape kingdoms. As it turned out, kindness had reshaped 2 hearts instead. And that was more than enough. The end.